Dr. Brian Dias is an Emory University and Yerkes National Primate Research Center neuroscientist studying intergenerational trauma.
And so epigenetics is one of the new frontiers that's allowing us to understand how the environment interacts with our genetic book of life.
This book of life, our DNA, has instructions for making our eyes green or our hair wavy, and epigenetics is the way those genes are turned on and off. Things that happen to us in our lives cause tiny chemical tags to be added or removed from our DNA. These tags turn those genes on or off.
Under supervision of the American Red Cross.
One of the most striking examples in literature are studies with descendants of Holocaust survivors. And what researchers have shown is that these descendants of Holocaust survivors, even if they did not experience the Holocaust themselves, those descendants had lower levels of a stress hormone compared to descendants of individuals who did not experience the Holocaust.
The joke is that our parents or grandparents used to walk uphill both ways, sometimes in the snow, to school. It seems that every generation thinks the ones that come after them have it too easy. The truth is, when our parents or grandparents tell us about their life struggles, it does influence us. But intergenerational trauma is different. It's not transmitted socially, it's biological. Things that happen to us in our lives can change our eggs and sperm.
The leading candidate for what carries information across generations are these tiny molecules called RNA, which we find in sperm and we find in eggs. And what I want you to think about is RNA being puppeteers. They're orchestrating, they're puppeteering how genes might be read or not as the embryo develops. You can have an embryo developing one way, and the brain wiring one way, for example, to allow for a mental health state to develop in adulthood, or you could have the embryo develop another way, the brain wiring another way, to allow for a protective effect. And so that's how we think intergenerational influences of stress are actually perpetuating across generations.
Trauma can actually slow down or arrest the brain's development, especially if it's early childhood trauma, complex trauma. But the real changes that we see are more in epigenetics. In other words, the way that genes express themselves. You can see this from studies on people who went through World War II and dealt with starvation, where succeeding generations, their bodies hung on to every calorie that they took in because they had been starved, and succeeding generations struggled with obesity. And sometimes those epigenetic changes can last for 2, 3, even 4 generations.
How do health experts spot the signs of generational trauma? There are actually quite a few ways it could show up.
For when you're sitting with a patient, you would look for their specific signs of trauma. So you would look for mood issues or anxiety issues. Those are the primary big symptoms that people typically present with. And then you want to do kind of an investigation of why they feel depressed or they feel anxious or they're having some mood issues. And then you start to ask, why do you think you might be so depressed? Why do you think you might be so anxious? When did that start? Has it always been there? And so when people say, yeah, I feel like I've always been anxious, I've always been kind of depressed, and my mood has always been sort of irritable ever since I was a little child, then the lights got to go off in your brain. You got to think, oh, I wonder what happened before they were even born. I wonder what happened with their parents. Did any of your parents feel depressed or anxious? And then we'd ask about that. And then we'd say, oh, how come they felt depressed or anxious? Were they ever victims of trauma?
Even with all those symptoms for health experts to consider, there's no specific diagnosis for generational trauma, according to the DSM-5, which is the standard classification of mental disorders used by mental health professionals. But the phenomena of intergenerational trauma is well accepted.
It's a learned thing that your brain actually learns, and then the DNA actually learns it and then turns on certain DNA sequences versus other sequences, and it affects brain development. It affects how you learn how to regulate your mood. It affects how your limbic system, which is the part of your brain that is involved with managing emotions, how that develops. And it also has implications on how you react to stress.
Unfortunately, there are no easy answers, but generational trauma can be resolved if a holistic, intense intervention is put in place. This often involves individual therapy, though group and family therapy is another option.
がしたか。